Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back into my dining room. I've been gone for a long time. I got a little friendly reminder today from one of my followers on YouTube, goes under the name Libtards Suck, and I will say that out loud. That's fine. You can choose whatever name you want. Want to know if I was okay. I'm fine. I have been focusing more on the blog, and then I have been dealing with some personal issues, trying to help my mother, who is elderly, 96, and she needs some help now. So that kind of explains my absence. Plus, I didn't get a chance to color my hair until last Friday, and I really did not feel fit to be in front of a camera, maybe with a bandana or something. I could have done the double mask thing. So that's why I have not been in front of the camera doing YouTube, but I have been covering some of these issues on the blog, specifically the high school issue. Bob Duff's brand new high school has been in there a few times. Some of the COVID issues, whether or not we are overcorrecting to prevent the spread or not doing enough, who's behaving themselves, who isn't. There's a lot to talk about because in addition to everything COVID, we also have a blossoming crisis. The crisis is not in the Black Lives Matter movement, but the brutal murder of George Floyd on Memorial Day, which was just a few weeks ago, kind of set everyone reeling. And it was a horrible act. The officer who murdered him is in jail. Hopefully he will stay there for a long time. The other officers have also been arrested and charged. Prior to that, a man who was running in his neighborhood was gunned down, and the man's name was Ahmaud Arbery. This murder happened in Georgia. He was running. He was murdered by vigilantes, and there is very strong evidence that these men were, not only were they racist, but that the murder itself was a hate crime. So, and it's an interesting distinction. People may be racist and they may commit crimes against a particular race, and that act is not necessarily a hate crime. In this case, it clearly seems to be a hate crime. And then the murder of Breonna Taylor, which was really horrible. We don't have video of that, but the police obtained a no-knock warrant. They broke into her home in the middle of the night. And so, you're a law-abiding American citizen, you support the First and the Second Amendment, and so maybe you have a firearm in your house to protect yourself. So her boyfriend responded to this, they didn't know what was happening. They didn't know who was breaking into their home. And so he came out with a gun and they just started firing, and Breonna Taylor died. She was shot 8 times. That may be the worst case because the reason for the no-knock warrant was not even tied to Ms. Taylor. Apparently they were looking for somebody else, and it was drug related. So you really, do you really need a no-knock warrant if you think somebody is selling weed? I mean, I guess if you think they're selling fentanyl, but then how do you screw it up like that? Like, how do you get the wrong person? So I think between this very extensive lockdown for COVID, where people haven't been able to leave their homes, people are losing their jobs, businesses are closing, and then you have one death after another of an African American, and it was kind of the tipping point for a lot of people, and they felt compelled to take very much an activist role. And so there have been many peaceful protests, but there also have been, unfortunately, violence and looting and injuries and deaths associated with this. Just to make my position on this clear, violence, whether it's, the murder of a black man, unarmed, not resisting arrest by a police officer, or a police officer being shot and paralyzed by a protester, these are evil acts. And we should be able to protest without violence. I don't buy this narrative that we need to tear everything down in order to fix what's broken. So you're hearing some of that. Some of that's coming from the fringe left, the Antifa. Some of it is coming from people within the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'll get into that in a minute. So it is generally a good thing that we have a First Amendment which protects our right to free assembly. And Norwalk had peaceful protests. We can't say that about every place else. There has been violence, businesses set on fire, terrible things happening in Seattle where a group has taken over the section of the city called Capitol Hill, and they've renamed it. It was called Chaz. Capitol Hill Authority Zone or something like that. And I think now they changed it to CHAP, but whatever, it's stupid. The whole thing is stupid. I saw a video of people inside there, nonsensical. They would like to demolish the police department. They want the police to surrender all their badges. And I don't think you have to destroy police departments in order to implement some effective changes to prevent these really horrific things from happening. But we also need to put this in perspective. And I hope you'll forgive me for putting this into perspective, because in no way am I diminishing the awful things that have happened to these members of the Black community. But there are billions of police interactions with the public across all races every year that end uneventfully. So we must put this in perspective. And yes, some changes are needed, but I do not believe that police departments have a problem with systemic racism. I don't believe our country is systemically racist. I don't believe we were founded on racist principles. I think we have a very ugly history in this country. It is a scar on this country, the scar of slavery and Jim Crow. But that doesn't mean that the founding fathers themselves were looking to create slave colonies, that was the purpose behind seeking independence from England. It's simply not true. Anybody who looked at the 1619 Project, they may believe that story, but actually Nicole Hannah Jones has had to issue some corrections on some of the allegations she made about the motivation for the revolution. And of course, we fought a bloody civil war. And yes, maybe it is time to take down some of those Confederate statues, but I think that there's a right way to do it. Nikki Haley took down the Confederate flag from the State House. It was years ago. There's a right way to do it. And doing it violently, where someone wound up dead not long ago because of a statue being torn down. I don't approve of that. I don't think it's the right way to go. I don't want to see COVID-19 did tremendous damage to us economically, and I think it hurt us deeply psychically. And I think that this, whatever we want to call it, this phenomenon of violence in order to effect change because the entire country is evil, I think that's evil. I think it's wrong, it's wrong-headed, and I don't think it's going to end well. I have been troubled by some of the violence, but there's another thing that really got under my skin with this, and that's that about a month ago, there were business owners in Connecticut who were suffering. And they were suffering because, there was no money coming in. So people pour their life savings into their businesses, and they're forced to lay off staff, or they're forced to close their doors, some of them closing their doors permanently. And there was a protest organized to take place in Hartford for people opposing the governor's executive orders and the shutdown. And that took place. Most people were in their cars and they were wearing masks. But Senator Bob Duff, on his official page, and there was another Hartford representative, recommended that people sign cards, and they were, I called them death cards. I wrote about this on my blog. I welcome you to look at some of those posts. But he said to one person, a constituent, this is one of his constituents, you can go protest, but sign this death card first. Sign this DNR, because if you're going to violate the governor's orders not to congregate, then you should forfeit your right to medical care. And it was shocking to me the number of people who agreed with Senator Duff on this, that protesters should be denied medical care, that if they become sick, they should not be resuscitated because they knew it was dangerous out there because of COVID-19. Now, we found a cure for COVID-19, and that's the BLM protests, that all of a sudden it didn't matter anymore. We saw medical doctors, most of them young, in New York City who signed this paper saying, well, concerns about COVID-19 notwithstanding, we think this cause is so worthy that it's really okay to violate some of the mitigation efforts. That's horseshit. I'm sorry, but that's total bullshit. Whether you agree with someone's reason for protesting or you do not, their right to protest is constitutionally guaranteed, and it is First Amendment violatory to prohibit or discourage protest based on whether or not you agree with the reason behind the protest. So Senator Duff didn't agree with the reason behind the protest, and so he said, well, you have to sign these DNR cards. But then when he liked the protest, then it was okay. And let's get one thing clear on the degree to which Senator Duff liked the George Floyd protests. He wants those votes, and whether he's looking for African-American votes or he's looking for woke white votes, and I think that's a lot of what he's looking for. He wants to be on the woke white side of things. Then he's going to pander for votes any way he can, whether he believes it or not. And if you look at the behavior from the senator, you're not going to see someone who is really sincere about doing things within his own constituency in order to elevate the minority community. He's had 18 years to help bring funding in here in order to close the achievement gap. And instead of bringing in, the $5 million we need for the ELL kids who weren't here a couple years ago, or additional funds needed for other minorities to help address the gap in achievement. Instead of doing that, he was maneuvering behind the scenes, behind closed doors with Diamantis to get the State Department of Education to agree to possibly fund his new high school at 80%. And then, I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to shove some legislation through. But that's his priority. That's a vanity project. We need operational funding in order to improve outcomes. And if he really cared the way he says he cares when he's, carrying a sign or whatever nonsensical demagoguery he's engaged in, if he really cared, he'd be working on bringing those funds here. Because one of the reasons that we have this achievement gap is that he's not sufficiently funding the district according to the level of need in the district. We are a high needs district and we are getting low needs funding. Now, the other area in which our elected officials, whether we're talking about Bob Duff or Mayor Rilling or the 14-1 Democrat-controlled Common Council, while you were out, while we were all hunkered down at home and cowering under the covers, they were busy spending your money to do things to benefit mostly the mayor. I mean, a lot of the stuff and Bob Duff. So the Planning Commission, which is appointed by the mayor, voted against the bonding of $50 million in bonding that was needed for Bob Duff's high school. The mayor added this back in. That should not have happened. First of all, we don't know that we're going to get the state funding. The reasoning behind the mayor adding this back in as well, if we haven't ponied up our share, then the state won't do their share. But I still think it is wrong-headed, and it shows that, that's a little Pippa back there, it shows that the mayor does not have his priorities straight, because what we really need is education funding. And we're not getting that. We're not getting that from the state, and the taxpayers really can't afford to pony up any more to cover this high needs population. There's something else that the Common Council did, and that is that they voted to extend the enterprise zone past Wall Street all the way to Cross Street. So in 2010, they voted to extend it all the way to Reed Putnam, which is where the mall is right now. And the redevelopment agency has been looking for this expansion for quite some time. It's percolated through in a couple different iterations, and they keep having to rethink it. You know, it's unpopular, it gets withdrawn. So this time it looks like it's a go. And I know exactly what happens behind the scenes. Some developers who give Harry money say, we're not going to do this development if you don't give us this enterprise zone. Now, I don't think enterprise zones are inherently bad, but I don't think we need that incentive in order to spur development in the Wall Street area. I think that if a meaningful analysis of the benefits of enterprise zones would be to find an analogous situation in another city that didn't have enterprise zones and see if things developed apace without the tax incentive. So what we have is that, you know, some developments that have come along that have fallen under that enterprise zone benefit, where you pay 0 taxes the first year and then you pay 10%, although the mall negotiated something slightly different for themselves. And so there are some developments that fell under that. You know, Ironworks, which is 1 North Water Street, that was a Spinnaker Clay Fowler development. Sono Pearl, which I think is FD Rich. The Marriott also falls in there. There's another FD Rich property in the works on Water Street, and it's in front of the Soundview Landing, which is the Housing and Urban Development and Redevelopment Agency redo of Washington Village. So there's a lot of tax breaks going out. But there were other developments that happened before the enterprise zone was extended in 2010. There's 33 North Water and the Sheffield. And I believe those were both Spinnaker. If they weren't, someone please correct me in the comments. But here's what I am going to wildly speculate here, that Clay Fowler said, I'm not doing any more development here unless I can get tax breaks. So if the problem that developers are having is that they're being overtaxed because the assessments aren't good, I would rather see that addressed on the other end and get better commercial assessments than extend these tax breaks as of right. Because, you know, a couple different things happen. We had properties that were taken through eminent domain for Reed Putnam. So you're forcing people out of their businesses and their homes. And a lot of times those are low-income people, and a lot of times they're minorities. So for all of the double talk about how the Democratic Party is, you know, Black Lives Matter to the Democratic Party, we haven't really seen that in actual practice. We've seen very different, we see gentrification, which is the opposite of Black Lives Matter. So also on the hot plate right now is the East Norwalk Transit-Oriented Development Plan. I don't know the intimate details of that plan. Diane Cece is the person to go to for that. She is extremely articulate and well-versed, and she knows all the minutia of the plan. I am looking at this plan the way I would look at any other plan in a general way, which is, you know, why do we need TOD right now? We are coming off of a 3-month shutdown. Businesses are canceling their leases. So people who were working in Manhattan, the owners of those businesses are canceling their leases because they found that people work better and more efficiently at home, and guess what? It's cheaper. So why would we be investing in TOD development when we don't know what the market is going to be like? Also, there's a strong correlation between high density and rate of infection here. So I think this is premature. So if COVID infection is associated with high density living, especially multi-story apartment buildings, why would the city be moving forward with a plan that's going to give us more multi-story apartment buildings? And why must our infrastructure be tied to agreeing to a certain level of development? I think the city has very few jobs that it needs to perform for us. One of those is to maintain the streets and sidewalks, regardless of how many apartments we have. You know, we shouldn't be like a blackmail scheme. We won't take care of your sidewalks if you don't let us build these apartments. And what I see time and again in the city is they go for the low-hanging fruit. So South Norwalk is the low-hanging fruit. We don't have the wherewithal. We don't have the wealth and the power in South Norwalk to stop these steamrollers from coming into our neighborhoods.